Okay, as we start, let me take you back to my school playground. In my school playground, if you made a promise, but you did so with your fingers crossed behind your back, whatever you said, you didn't have to do. So you could promise, I'll play with you at break time, or I'll sit with you at lunchtime, or I'll do homework with you after school. And the person you said those things to might have a reasonable expectation that they would happen. But if you did them with your fingers crossed, you were completely off the hook. And in that special way that children can be absolutely delightful, if you managed to pull the wool over someone's eyes, it sort of came with a strange sense of triumph. So if they said to you, but you promised, you got to say, but I had my fingers crossed. And you'd won a great victory over them. Aren't children delightful? Okay, that's my school playground. Let me take you somewhere slightly more modern. Let me take you to the news app on my phone, where more and more everything that a public figure says has to be fact-checked. Because even if what they're saying is true, it feels like our public discourse has fallen so far that unless it's sort of independently verified, we probably won't believe them. And I guess all that's happening is because some have realised that they can, lie and get away with it. And fake news proliferates, doesn't it? And it's to their own advantage, and there doesn't seem to be any hang-ups for it. Or staying online, let me take you to my Facebook feed. And I don't know if you've ever had an invite to something on Facebook, an event will pop up and you can reply. And you can say, yes, I'll be there, or no, I can't make it, or maybe. And nearly always, that maybe option has the most responses. And I think sometimes we might tick that one because we genuinely don't know if we can make it. But more often than not, I think we tick the maybe button as a sort of insurance policy in case a better offer comes up, because then we feel we can sort of get away from it because we only said we might come. Our FOMO, our fear of missing out, stops us from committing, and we say, yeah, might do, knowing that gives us a wiggle room to escape if something we'd rather do comes up. Okay, another place to take you. Let me take you to a conversation with me in church about 10, 12 years ago. And you've just shared something with me that's happening in your life that actually is really hard. And it's a struggle. And I've listened. And I've said, I'll pray for you. And 12 years ago, I may have done that, but if I'm honest, it didn't always happen. And sometimes it didn't happen because I forgot. But sometimes I think I didn't pray for people because what they'd shared was just so heavy, so sad, that I sort of didn't want to engage with it. But it looked good to say I'd pray for them, so I sort of did that, and, Now, I don't do that anymore, and I'll tell you what I do instead later on. But I reckon maybe 12 years ago, that's sadly what you might have got from me. Right, our magical mystery tour ends in Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 to 37, because these verses, they inhabit the same world as my school playground and my news app and my Facebook feed and me 12 years ago at church. Jesus is speaking, and among his audience, there will have been some sort of Jewish leaders, or in fact, it had just inhabited the whole of the Jewish culture. And those people, they really knew the Old Testament well, the sort of first bit of the Bible, the Jewish bit of the Bible, the Jewish scriptures. And specifically, they knew the passages that Jesus was summarizing when he said in verse 33, again, you've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the oaths you have made. They knew all the verses that were summarized in that. You've heard it said from Jesus. Verses like, Leviticus 19:12 that we heard Marina read earlier, which says, Moses is speaking, "Do not swear falsely by my name," and so Moses is reporting to the people what the Lord is saying. "Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." You see, the people of Jesus' day, they knew that they couldn't swear an oath that invoked their God's name and not deliver on it. That was not okay. And so if they swore an oath and they called upon the name of the Lord to back up that oath, they had to come through on it. The problem was that they didn't like to be confined by the truth like that. And so they looked for a workaround. And they twisted things. And a law that God intended to promote honesty became a license to promote deceit. And they thought to themselves something like this. They thought, okay, well, I won't misuse the name of the Lord my God. What can I do? I know, I'll think of something that sounds impressive, something like the heavens and or the earth or Jerusalem. They sound big and important, and so if I swear by them, well, everyone will think I'm keeping my word. But because I'm not invoking the name of the Lord, well, I can play fast and loose with the truth, whether that's to get one over on someone else or in case a better option comes up, or maybe just something is so sad I don't want to engage with it, or actually I quite like the fake news version of this story. And so instead of swearing by the Lord, they started swearing by heaven and earth and Jerusalem. And the really cautious ones swore by themselves. They swore by their own heads. Because, well, that's nothing to do with God, surely. You see, the people of Jesus' day, they were all over making promises with their fingers crossed behind their backs, spreading fake news, expecting to get away with it. And they always ticked that maybe box. They rarely prayed for people when they said they would. And so Jesus calls their deceitful ways out. Verse 34. He says, "But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black." Do you see what Jesus says? He says, guys, you can't swear by heaven. That's God's throne. That's got as much to do with him as his name. You can't do that and then break your word. And he says the same is true of the earth. That's the Lord's footstool. Jerusalem, it's the city of his great King. Jesus says if you swear an oath by any of these places, you're as bound to keep it as if you swear by God himself. And he goes on to say, well, in fact, the same is true of your heads. Guys, he says you can't even change the colour of a single one of your hairs. And even if, I don't know what hair dye was like in their day, even if they could break out the just for men, well, it wouldn't get to the roots, would it? It grows out. And so for these people to swear by themselves, as people made in God's image and sustained by him in even the smallest of ways, like their hair, if they did that with an intention of breaking their oath, it was just as bad as swearing by heaven or earth or Jerusalem or God himself. Jesus, he says to them, don't do that. Don't use an oath to get one over on another, or to spread falsehood to your own benefit, or to be non-committal if you fear missing out, or to say things that make you look good. Don't do that. Because to do that, as he says at the end of verse 37, it comes from the evil one. The Father of life is all about that sort of behaviour, isn't he? So when he says to Adam and Eve in the garden, "You will not certainly die," when they're thinking about eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what's he doing? He's trying to get one over on God, isn't he? When he said, "Did God really say?" He's getting his fake news out there. When he goes on to say to Adam and Eve about that fruit, well, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be open and you'll be like him, knowing good from evil. He's appealing to their sense of FOMO. And of course, in those words, he also pretends to have Adam and Eve's best interests at heart. He's trying to make himself look good in their eyes. Jesus, he sort of shines a light on this so that we can see deceit is the way the evil one works. And Jesus says, listen, if you've been brought into my kingdom of light from his kingdom of darkness, surely you don't want to go back there. Surely you don't want to behave like him. Do you? Much better, as Jesus will go on to say at the end of chapter 5, summarising all that he's been teaching us at the start of the Sermon on the Mount. Much better, verse 48, to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. What's God like when it comes to keeping his word? Well, he never tries to get out of anything. Even if he knows it will be terribly costly to him, he still does it. Let me give you an example. Here's a promise he makes back in the Old Testament book of 2 Chronicles. God says, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin." Which, of course, he did by sending his one and only Son from heaven. That Son who would go on to say, "I am the way and the truth and the life." That Son who would also say, when I've gone, I will ask the Father and he will give you another advocate to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The Father's Son is the truth. The Father's Spirit that he sends is the Spirit of truth. Our God has no time for fake news. And there's no need to have FOMO when this God is your God. Again, as Jesus said of himself, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." There's nothing you need to fear missing out, Jesus says. And at the same time, your suffering is never going to slip his mind. It's never going to be too much for him. There are loads of verses like this in the Bible, but here's just one. The Lord is good, a refuge in time of troubles. He cares for those who trust in him. He's not going to do what 12 years ago I would have done and just forget or not engage. He cares. He meets you in those times of trouble. And Jesus, he says to his people, when you've enjoyed and experienced the goodness of one who keeps his word, who has no deceit in them, when you've enjoyed that and maybe seen how different it is to what the rest of the world has to offer, and how life-giving and how life-changing it is, well, you'll want to show others that same love. And so before we get on to what this might look like for us, if you're struggling with wanting to be truthful, here's something to start with, to prayerfully dwell on God's truthfulness and how it's benefited you. You might even want to think, well, what would it be like if God didn't keep his word? What would that mean for me? And perhaps, again, particularly if for whatever reason the rest of your world is a web of lies and where you can't trust anyone, we need to do this all the more, don't we? Because we come with that expectation in mind and we bring that to God and we think he's just the same. And to slow down, to reflect on what he is like, to what that means for us. And then when that sort of wells up within you and you think that is so wonderful, I want to share it with others. Here's the thing Jesus tells us not to do. He says, don't swear an oath. Verse 37, all you need to say is simply yes or no. If you're not interested in crossing your fingers behind your back or ticking maybe because a better offer might come up, Jesus says you can simply say yes or no. You don't need to dress it up in fancy language. I swear by heaven. I swear by Jerusalem. I swear by my own head. You just get to say simply yes or no. Now, there are loads of ways we can do this. Let me give you, quickly, 8 ways that you might want to do this. Number 1, perhaps the most obvious from this bit is don't make empty promises. Don't make empty promises. Don't say, oh yeah, it would be great to catch up, without getting the diary out, if you know actually you'll never follow up. Don't say in the office, oh, I'll definitely have that with you by the end of the day, if you know there's so much other work on your plate that you'll never get to it. And don't say, I'll pray for you, if you probably won't. Which leads me to the second way to say simply yes. Just pray there and then. That's what I've started doing. I won't say, I'll pray for you. I'll say, can I pray for you now? And that's just, I found that so much better. And you might think, oh yeah, but, well, you know, I'm not sure about doing that. But I think I found the question that's helpful for me is, what's the worst that could happen? Someone in the coffee shop could think I'm a bit strange. That's okay. What's the best that could happen? Well, having prayed for them once, I might pray for them again later. But even more than that, the Lord Almighty, who cares deeply for them, will hear your prayer for them. And who knows what might happen then? Number 3, it's really an expansion of that first idea of not making empty promises, which is to be a person of integrity. To have that sort of integrity of speech that runs all the way through you. So it doesn't just come from when you're saying yes or no, being definitive. It just runs through your whole way of speaking. So I guess it would mean you'd never, in a sort of at the milder end of things, you're not going to slander someone by spreading falsehoods about them. And you're not going to say something different to their face than you're going to say behind their back. Maybe at the other extreme, having integrity of speech means you're never going to abuse someone by gaslighting them, by saying things that mean they call into question their perception of reality, because you're just dripping doubt on their recollection of events. And of course, there's a whole bunch of things between those two extremes. Changing gears slightly for number 4, you might want to commit socially. Let's not be maybe Christians, just sort of teetering in case a better option comes up. If someone invites you to something, if you think, actually, I would like to do that, that could be a good thing to do. Just dive in, just say yes. Don't sit on the fence. I think it'll honour them, and it may well calm the anxieties, the social anxieties we feel. But Number 5, you can say no when you need to. That's not a great way of putting it. Saying no is okay. That is a good thing, Jesus says. Because what does he say? He doesn't say, verse 37, all you need to say is simply yes, full stop. No. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Saying no is an option. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but some of us are so keen to be liked by everyone that we just say yes to everything we possibly can. And we find ourselves overwhelmed. And Jesus says we don't have to do that. No is an option. And of course, while I framed that one and the last one socially, what Jesus says applies more broadly than that. That committing to things, or indeed saying no to things, clearly, simply, are good things to do. Number 6, as Paul writes in his letter to the Ephesians church, we're to speak the truth in love to one another. Some of us are great truth speakers. But if we're honest with ourselves, our truth speaking is a bit like one of those American sort of monster trucks that just demolishes everything in its path. And it gets through, just everything is crushed under its wheels. We speak the truth. Others of us are so keen to not offend anyone that we sort of negate the truth for what we think is love. And so actually we don't say what it would be helpful for someone else to hear. And even if they've asked our opinion, we sort of we think we're loving, and yet we're not speaking the truth. And maybe you're at one of those ends. I guess another way we get this not quite right is we're so attuned to looking to correct others, whether that's what we've grown up with or what our characters are like, that actually we never point out the good in another. And surely that is the easiest way of speaking the truth in love. To say, hey, I've noticed that God is doing this in your life. Isn't it amazing? That's a great thing for you to say. That's a great thing for them to hear. And yet it's one I think that's woefully underused. 7. This is one I borrowed from an American pastor with the name of R. Kent Hughes. He speaks of developing habitual honesty. That is, being so honest in the little things that it becomes a habit, an impulse in the large things. And so you just, being honest in the small things, it so ingrains this habit in our hearts that actually the big things, maybe the more consequential things, our instinct is to just tell the truth. Every week at church, regulars will know we have a coffee time question to help us keep thinking and chatting about what we've been hearing from God's word. This week's asks, what might simply saying yes or no look like for you this week? Of the 8 on my list, this one, number 7, is the one that God's been putting his finger on for me. So why not come and ask me about it later, what being honest in the little things can look like. And then lastly, and at risk of undermining everything I've just said, oaths are occasionally okay. You see, as I was preparing this week, I sort of had a nagging question in the back of my mind because, well, there are times in the Bible when people do make an oath. Jesus, when he's before the Sanhedrin, it's pretty clear that he makes an oath there. In the letter to the Hebrews, it speaks of God swearing an oath. And the Apostle Paul, he swears oaths at least 3 times in his letters in Romans and 2 Corinthians, in Galatians. And the sort of nagging question has been, well, how does that fit with Jesus saying, don't swear oaths? How does that fit with his teaching? And as I've thought a bit about those instances, I realised that those oaths were sworn very much for the benefit of another, sometimes even at the request of another. It's not as if they're going, well, if I say this like this with my fingers crossed behind my back, then look what I can get away with. And so if it's for the benefit of another, or if it's asked of you by another, I think we can swear an oath. So if someone in a court of law asks you to swear an oath, that's okay. Or if someone, I don't know what it might come up in, if someone asks you to swear an oath to reassure them, then you're free to do so. Of course, because your yes will be a yes and your no will be a no, it's not necessary, but if it would help them, then it's something we can do. If you're striving to be perfect like your Heavenly Father is perfect rather than deceitful like the devil, you're not going to start pulling the wool over someone's eyes just because they've mentioned an oath. Because that's Jesus' big concern here in this bit of the Sermon on the Mount. He wants us to be so captivated by how God has kept his word to us that we want to love others similarly. And we want them to experience something of God's love through how we speak. Such that all we need to say is simply yes or no. Let me pray that that be true of us.